just keeping up the pace. Islam is for every race.
So Islam is for every race, is it? Huh, I guess that means Islam isn't a race. Who knew? But criticizing it is definitely still racist against brown people. Because it's 2015.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, and welcome to this episode of Beauties of Islam.
Oh wow, a pasty white Texan Muslim. I didn't even know those existed. Well, clearly he's just a house American paid by Islamist think tanks to advance pro-Middle East, pro-terror narratives. I mean, look at this well-bearded talking porch monkey. He's obviously just their lapdog, native informing and serving as their ex-Christian validator. What do you mean porch monkey's racist against black people? I thought it meant a white guy.
I'm Yusuf Estes.
I've been spending a lot of time lately learning from the social justice warriors, and in particular I've learned that a white man dressing up in the manner of a majority non-white culture and stealing a name from their people is called cultural appropriation, and it's basically the same as lynching a Syrian refugee while wearing brownface. Now, as a trans-black, lesbian, non-transitioning trans woman from a post-colonial country, I have tons of victim cred, and as such it matters that this deeply offends me. Of course, for all my victim cred, I'm still a privileged Western atheist and not a member of the world's most marginalized group, the second largest religion in the world, and so sometimes I need to go hide in the closet and cut myself and cry, but that's beside the point. So you white American, you can call yourself whatever you want, but according to Wikipedia, your non-appropriated name is Joseph Estes. So out of respect for the oppressed minorities whose cult you've so cruelly colonized, I'm gonna call you Joe.
And I recall that when I was first introduced to Islam, the person that I was talking to was a Muslim, of course, and I was trying to call him to my religion in Christianity. And he said, I will go to your religion if it's better than my religion, but you have to have proof.
Oh, wow, that's a tough one as a Christian. I have a feeling this story isn't going to end with a new Christian convert.
Now, I thought about this for a minute. I said, wait a minute. Proof? What are you talking about? Proof. Religion is not about proof. As a matter of fact, religion is about faith.
Oh, yeah, this story ain't going to end well for you. And I know that because now you're a Muslim. Somehow, you ended up in an even more absurd and ugly religion than the one you started out in.
He said in Islam, you see, we do have faith, of course, but we have proof to back it up. We can prove everything in Islam.
Everything? That jinn exist? That ant in Surah 27 verse 18 actually spoke? That Noah's flood happened? That Muhammad split the moon and rode a flying horse to Jerusalem? The insanity in that book just goes on and on and on. Are you sure you want to start talking about proving everything?
Wait a minute. You're going to tell me, and this is what I said to him, you're going to sit there and tell me, as a Muslim, you can prove there's God? Then he said to me, you mean to sit there and tell me, as a preacher for Christianity, that you can't?
That's a pretty good burn. Seriously, you couldn't even pull the weakest of the weak arguments for Christianity? That is, just accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior and God will reveal himself to you? I mean, that's a stock standard Christian response when people ask for evidence of God. Or to climb up an inch from the bottom of the barrel, you could have just fired a few of those supposed impressive biblical prophecies at him. I mean, spoiler alert, but later in this video you're going to do the same damn thing with supposed impressive Quranic scientific predictions, so what's the difference?
I had to think about that for a minute. Well, there is no proof God exists.
Joe, why am I, a lifelong atheist, a better Christian preacher than you ever were?
Actually, what we understand today about astronomy, what we understand today about the universe, has only really come out in the last 100 years or so.
Depends on the topic, but okay, I'll grant that.
A lot of it developed in the last 500 years, the basis for what we know today, but the proofs and evidences, even of the content of the moon, what it's made up of.
If you're talking about actually analyzing the material close up, then sure, that's true.
How it moves, and so on, has only really been known in the last 100 years or so.
If you're just talking about elliptical orbits, that's been known since Kepler, but it's really not clear what you mean.
And as far as ever going out of the Earth's atmosphere, this has only been in the last 50 years or so that even as discussed as a serious topic.
Serious proposals about spaceflight span the whole 20th century. Now, I don't know when you made this video, but I doubt it was much less than 50 years after Sputnik in 1957, which was the result of decades of discussion of spaceflight. But that's a minor objection.
Well, okay, so he said, but yet 1,400 years ago, this is something that we have in the Quran.
What?
I said, what?
No, I said what?
That's when he began to open the Quran and show me some of the amazing statements that are made about the creation itself. And there are so many.
But of course, you're not going to bother to tell us any. Now, just to make this totally clear for the audience, yes, this is the first argument presented in support of the claim that Allah exists. If it's the first, it's probably also the best. The premise then is that if Muhammad made some novel and intelligent claims about the composition of the moon or the way it moves, or proposed that one could leave the Earth's atmosphere, it wouldn't just be because he was a novel and intelligent thinker like the philosophers and scientists before and after him, but that he was divinely inspired and therefore God exists. Because reasons. It's a pretty flaccid claim, but let's consider it anyway just for fun. Alright, let's see. The composition of the moon. Now, I'd consider the Quran fairly advanced if it said something as simple as it's a giant rock with an iron core. So what does the Quran actually say about the composition of the moon? Nothing. Just, nothing. The motion of the moon, alright. I'd be impressed with less than Keplerian or Newtonian depth, but if it said, say, the moon travels in an elliptical orbit with the Earth at one focus, I'd find that really interesting. So what does it actually say? Well, it says the sun and the moon travel on round paths. Surah 21, verse 33. I find that hilariously unimpressive. Now, Islamic apologists tend to make the claim that this is supposed to refer to the concept of orbits, that is, the moon's orbit around the Earth and the sun's orbit around the center of the galaxy. But if that's the case, it's the most carelessly written thing I've ever read in my life, since it's entirely compatible with something people have been saying since the start of recorded history, that the sun and the moon go around the Earth. The only way to make it say something else is to reverse engineer it. First, you have to learn about galaxies and the sun's orbit around the Milky Way's core through science, and then assign that meaning to this verse afterwards. In which case, everyone in history who ever mentioned that the sun follows a path but didn't specify further is equally as correct and miraculous as the Quran. What an astonishingly low bar these apologists have for what constitutes a miracle. But I suppose you gotta work with what you got. And finally, the concept of leaving the Earth's atmosphere, or in other words, space travel. What does the Quran have to say about that? Well, it seems that the space travel miracle comes from Surah 55, verse 33.
O you assembly of jinns and men, if it be you can pass beyond the zones of the heavens and the earth, you pass. Not without authority shall you be able to pass.
Yes, this is seriously touted on apologist websites as predicting space travel. So in other words, what the Quran actually says about space travel is dick all.
But in this episode, I just want to focus on who is Allah and what is the proof. The first and foremost proof is that we all exist.
Are you seriously telling me that as a Christian preacher you'd never heard the design argument? Do they pay you to do that job?
You exist, I exist. How did we get here?
Therefore God put us here.
How did our intelligence come to us?
Therefore God's an AI programmer.
How is it that we're able to reason?
Because it's 2015. Oops, wrong non-argument. Therefore God builds meat computers in his spare time.
How is it that we're able, as human beings, to interact with each other? How does that come about?
Therefore God makes us shake hands and kiss and fuck.
Where does it come from?
Therefore God made it out of nothing. Oh, where did he come from? He was always there? Oh, why wasn't something else there? 'Cause that doesn't make me feel nice. How does my fridge work? Therefore God injects it with cold. How does gravity work? Therefore God pulls us down all the time. How does lightning work? Therefore Zeus is angry.
Fucking magnets, how do they work? And I don't want to talk to a scientist. Y'all motherfuckers lying and getting me pissed.
As you can probably tell, I don't have a lot of respect for the design argument. A shrug is not an argument in favor of any scientific position, and it definitely is not proof of anything.
And if you said this is just a hodgepodge of accidents taking place, something without any order to it.
I haven't said it's anything, Joe. I'm not making assertions because I don't have any emotional investment in this. The universe seems to exist, at least convincingly enough that I can go about my life. Yeah, I'm mildly interested in what people find out from their careful investigations using the scientific method, but if they're all proven wrong tomorrow, I'll be surprised, and then I'll shrug, and then I'll get on with my day. You, on the other hand, Joe, are making assertions and backing them up with expressions of ignorance and horribly biased, stretched, distorted readings of an old book. You're making a spectacle of yourself.
One of the most important things about the belief in Allah is that it's not according to how you and I want to perceive God, but rather how He really exists, and that can only be known if He Himself informs us of who He is.
Oh, so God speaks to you directly then, does He? Or do you just think you know who God is because someone else told you or the scriptures say so?
He said, okay, first of all, we as Muslims totally accept that God exists without any doubt. But it's not just because somebody said so. Not just because Scripture says so. Because if you sit there and try to make up something about how he is, and I make up something else, another person makes up something else, well, if you got 6 billion people, we'll have 6 billion different opinions of who God is or who he isn't.
Which is exactly how the world is. Thousands of religions, billions of opinions. That's what it looks like when you have people starting religions by making stuff up, and other people creating sects within those religions by making more stuff up, and people splitting those sects by making more stuff up, and so on.
In fact, many people just accept that, well, God is to you whatever you want him to be.
And this is very true. Since God's in your head, he's whatever you want him to be, or at least whatever you were convinced that he is. Figments of your imagination tend to have this weird quality where they may not be exactly what you want, but they're still exactly what your brain invents, and you know this. You know very well that the Hindu gods are make-believe, that Ahura Mazda is make-believe, that the version of Jesus, who's the incarnation of God, is make-believe, and yet the believers in all of these think exactly the same thing about your version of God, and for the same reasons. You're not special, Joe. You're just one more idiot with an opinion. And as they say, opinions are like assholes, most of them stink. So how are you going to convince the world that your asshole doesn't stink when they can smell yours as easily as you can theirs?
But that's such an illogical statement that it really means that it's not about God anymore, it's just about people's feelings.
It's not an illogical statement, it's an uncomfortable one for you. Because you wish that God could be based on something more than unfounded opinions and feelings, but it's not. It's a big game of pretend, as transparent as it could possibly be. You know, on a daily basis, I feel like I'm standing outside of a giant glass dome while you people run around inside crashing into each other while shouting that I can't see you! Well, I can! And once I get over the despair, all that's left is to pull my chair close to the glass and make some popcorn and enjoy the comedy.
Their own emotions and people's thoughts and their own logic. But it doesn't really mean that it comes from him.
Right. It doesn't.
Could you imagine that somebody say to you, well, your professor of your particular course in the university, he is whoever you think he is. He's whatever you think he is. Does that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense if they're walking me through a thought experiment. An imaginary professor at an imaginary university can be a time-traveling purple goblin, and it's equally true to reality as any other version.
Or if somebody said your parents are whoever you think they are. That's too much. My parents are whoever, well, I think my parents are rich then. I think my parents are, really wealthy, and I think my parents are going to give me a brand new car tomorrow morning. Oh, well, that's all well and great, but guess what?
What?
It's not true, is it?
Nope. Paradise.
There's no evidence for this thing. You're just talking. You're just saying something without any proof.
Oh, I just know that's going to come back and bite you in the ass.
The proof in Islam is the speech of Almighty Allah to us. And of course, in our other programs, we've discussed at length, really, talking about this amazing thing called the speech of Allah. Allah's recitation, His Quran. And in here, we have found so many times examples of things that could not have been known even 100 years ago, much less 1400 years ago. 14 centuries back, people did not know how the creation of the universe was. They didn't understand that it in fact was the earth going around the sun.
Neither did Muhammad, which is, of course, why the Quran doesn't say it was. Although 850 or so years before Muhammad, Aristarchus of Samos had already proposed a heliocentric model of the universe, but I suppose that's neither here nor there.
And people didn't know that in fact the earth was even round.
No, of course they didn't. I mean, the Quran was only written about 950 years after Aristotle laid out why the earth was necessarily spherical due to gravity in Decilo Book 2, Chapter 14, stating,
"Its shape must necessarily be spherical, for every portion of earth has weight until it reaches the center, and the jostling of parts greater and smaller would bring about not a waved surface, but rather compression and convergence of part on part until the center is reached. ... If, on the one hand, there were a smaller movement from each quarter of the extremity to the single center, it is obvious that the resulting mass would be similar on every side. For if an equal amount is added on every side, the extremity of the mass will be everywhere equidistant from its center, i.e. the figure will be spherical. But neither will it in any way affect the argument if there is not a similar accession of concurrent fragments from every side. For the greater quantity finding a lesser in front of it must necessarily drive it on, both having an impulse whose goal is the center and the greater weight driving the lesser forward till this goal is reached."
You know, if you showed me a place in the Quran where something that well thought out is said, I might actually be a little bit impressed. And the Quran was only written about 850 years after Eratosthenes measured the circumference of that sphere. And anyway, how can an idea possibly spread from Greece to Arabia in less than 1,000 years? It is to laugh. Of course! If the Quran said the Earth was spherical, it would have been way ahead of Aristotle's time. The fact that it says no such thing, well, that doesn't make Muhammad 950 years out of date or anything. No! He was receiving revolutionary scientific knowledge from God, because, Surah 79, verse 30 says the Earth is shaped like an ostrich egg, even though it doesn't actually say that, and the Earth isn't shaped like an egg. So take that, atheists.
People didn't know that the moon was actually going around the Earth.
The Quran says the moon goes on a rounded path, not specifically that it goes around the Earth. And I know that because it says it in the same place as it talks about the sun going on a rounded path, and apologists insist that that does not specify that it's going around the Earth because the sun is going around the center of the Milky Way. But I would be shocked if its author didn't think the moon goes around the Earth, since that's kind of the point of geocentrism. I mean, people have always thought the moon goes around the Earth. You haven't really thought this through, have you?
And they didn't know, certainly they didn't know about the galaxies, they didn't know about the Milky Way, they didn't know about the constellations the way they really are.
Surah 15:16 mentions constellations, which isn't surprising since a constellation is just a picture someone imagines in the stars, like seeing a bunny rabbit in a cloud. But obviously, the Quran contains no mention of any galaxy, the Milky Way included. In other words, no, people 1400 years ago certainly did not know about galaxies, and that included Muhammad. All you've got is that verse I mentioned earlier about the sun and the moon traveling on round paths, which I'm sure gave you guys a real scare when scientists learned that the Earth orbits the sun, until they learned that the sun also orbits the center of the Milky Way, which you latched onto as your last best hope to save the reputation of your favorite book. Watching the scrambling desperation of the religious literalists in the face of science has always been one of my favorite pastimes. It just never gets old.
They only guessed because they did not have microscopes. They did not have rocket ships. They did not have the Hubble telescope. That's a real good one, with that amazing set of refractory and the mirrors within it that expand to huge pictures of what's out in the universe, that you can see how things are really growing, actually, as they are created. Billions of light years. And all of this that we know today, we take it for granted. You can go to NASA's website, for instance, and see these things that are so amazing that you and I would just sit there and go, look at that. Yet it's described in the Quran 1400 years ago.
All right, Muslim John Pendleton, calm yourself. Yeah, I'd say you're on the money. People 1400 years ago didn't have the equipment or the knowledge to know about even what we now consider the very basic features of the universe. And that's why the Quran is such a train wreck when it comes to its description of the cosmos. That's why it's necessary for apologists like you and Zakir Naik and whoever else to spend your time trying to convince people to reinterpret the Quran so it at least isn't contradicted so badly by modern science. It's really about the same as anything Kent Hovind's ever said, just with more facial hair. Do you remember, Joe, what you said about saying things without any proof? Joe? Remember that, Joe?
If we said that Allah is in the creation, literally, He Himself is the creation, like the creation or in the creation, this is a big mistake. You know what's going to happen if we do that?
You'll lose a good excuse for why He behaves so much like something that doesn't exist?
Think about it.
Yeah, that'd make arguments from ignorance a whole lot harder to take seriously. How awful.
It means that a person would say, Allah is in the clouds, Allah is in the heaven, Allah is in the rainbows, He's in the beautiful things that we see. Now, a disbeliever, an atheist, someone who doesn't believe in God at all, what's he going to tell you?
Okay, so have you designed a device to test the God content of beautiful things?
Oh, so God's everywhere? You say, yes, God is everywhere. He'll say, is God in your toilet? Whoa, what a horrible thing to say.
Okay, so we're going the trollish atheist route, not the scientific atheist route. Fair enough, definitely some of us would do that.
Is he in the HIV virus, AIDS? Oh, this is something terrible. Nuclear waste, disease. Is he in the ugly things that happen? Is he in the hurricanes? They'd be like, now what?
Now you talk about Allah's great plan and how bad things are actually good things, and it's just a test, and God works in mysterious ways, and... Oh yeah, Eve ate an apple, so you deserve it anyway. I don't know, I'm used to dealing with Christians.
By putting Allah in the creation or like the creation, what happens is that a disbeliever finds more excuses to disbelieve.
Okay, so the main reason it's a mistake to say Allah is in the creation isn't because you think it's factually incorrect, but because you think it's bad for business. That is delightfully cynical and manipulative. I like the way you think.
And even try to confuse the believer.
I wouldn't bother. You don't seem to need help getting confused.
We know Allah is Al-Wadud. He's the loving. Then the one who had everything, he would be put into the hellfire, the Jahannam, like you put a pin into something and you pull it out. And then he would be asked, in your whole life, did you ever see anything good? He said, well, Wallahi, in my whole life, I never saw anything good. Because 1 second in hell wipes out any good you ever saw. His love is eternal. His love is ongoing. That the one who had everything in this life, actually he was a bad person. Allah did not love him. Allah hated this man. And the man was so evil and so bad, but he did do some good things because nobody can be perfectly bad. The good that the man did, Allah rewarded him in this life because this life is nothing. There's nothing compared to the next life. So he gave him his reward here. So in the next life, he didn't even get to smell the paradise. He, in fact, went to hell. And that's a horrible, horrible destination for anybody. His love is something that's all-encompassing and all-engulfing. This is his love, Al-Wadud.
It didn't seem to encompass that guy. Finite evil and some good in life, leading to infinite punishment in the next, because Allah hated him infinitely and forever. Now, Joe, I'm sure that you're a very moderate Muslim. You're probably a real nice guy, raised right down in Texas. You're a family man, you're a hard worker, whatever. It doesn't change the fact that you're promoting the idea that some people are hated by God, and so deserve not only a proportional punishment for their crimes, but the removal of the memory of every good thing they ever experienced, and an eternity of the worst horrors imaginable, diminishing the severity of any horrors inflicted on them in this life to nothing, and making any good they do meaningless. You're promoting the idea that this life is entirely valueless, and that any good or bad that's ever been done on Earth is totally insignificant. And yet despite that, somehow it's also significant enough to deserve punishment or reward. And I'm not naive enough to think that I, as someone who doesn't believe your little god even exists, who's a free speech advocate who's drawn Muhammad sucking off a camel, who listens to music with instruments, which is haram, someone who detests Islam on every level, I have absolutely no doubt that I would fit your mold of that very evil person very well, making me deserving of having my good memories edited out of my mind and replaced with an eternity of torture, despite my never having actually harmed anyone to any significant degree, and despite my contributions to society being, I think most would say, a net positive. I'm not going to downplay the severity of these ideas you're preaching. The wide acceptance of this kind of thinking is part of why every day you have people strapping shrapnel bombs to themselves and detonating them in hotels, or holding people by their hair and cutting their heads off while they beg for their fucking lives, or burning others alive, or flying planes into towers, or shooting them to death in theaters, all in the name of Allah. The idea that nothing in this life matters. The denigration of the only real life people are ever going to have in favor of empty promises of a future perfect one. The idea that some people are hated not just by other people, but by the very foundation of reality and existence that spawned them. The idea that the ultimate good in the universe will use the worst evil you can possibly imagine to punish people it doesn't like. And worst of all, when that's applied to a religion based on a book that commands death for all manner of petty and victimless offenses, including mere non-belief or speech without action, this moderate Islam you're preaching is contributing to the problem of Islamic jihad. You do more than simply provide shelter for the extremists, Joe. You argue for an extremist way of thinking. You have to realize there are hundreds of millions of relative moderates who genuinely believe in and spread this dogma. And the state of the world in 2015 seems distinctly less surprising when you realize that. Now, I know it's not the only factor. Obviously it's not. There are a lot of other beliefs within Islam that also contribute, although I think really the problem with them mostly comes back to this. And certainly there are non-religious factors as well. But this damn well is a factor.
But we still don't say God is love. Why?
I hope, but I doubt, that you're going to say it's because of what you just said. You know, I don't understand why you people even bother to pretend that this monstrous fever dream of yours has anything at all to do with love. The outright lie implicit in that sentiment makes your religion look somehow even worse to the unbrainwashed than it would without it. At least if you would admit that your God is a vicious, hateful monster that you serve out of fear for his infinite rage over your petty crimes in life, which you admit are as nothing compared to infinity, at least then you'd seem more pitiable and less contemptible.
Because al-wadud is something more than love. It's loving. It's ongoing.
So is love. Love is a process that happens. It's ongoing the whole time it goes on.
It's eternal.
Oh, eternal. Okay, I'll admit that I know of no eternal love because I'm not aware of any eternal process. There may be one, but nobody's ever demonstrated one.
It's not just like a place on a map. No. Allah is not love as in down the street and turn the corner and there he is. No, that's not that's not the concept that we're talking about in Islam when we talk about al-wadud.
That's not the concept of love either. Wait, are you saying I can find random caches of love stored around the city simply by going outside and looking around? Like some sort of emotional geocaching? Is there an app for that?
Allah tells us in the Quran that he's al-wadud, the loving.
Hey, what a coincidence! I'm al-wadud too! There's a book that says the same thing and proves it. Available at fine bookstores everywhere. I've cited it in the same place you cited the Quranic verses about galaxies. Now come over here so I can flay you with this rusty knife because Logic the Loving hates you.
And yet at the same time he tells us there's nothing like him.
Oh, if he were real, I'd definitely agree. He is one of a kind among the sanguinary savages.
There's no love like Allah's love.
Entirely true, because there's no love that's hate.
In the English language, they only have one word. God. Little G-O-D. It means something worshipped. It could be idols, images, pictures, statues. It could be human beings. It could be anything. It could be gods. Little G-O-D-S. But when you mean the God, you have to capitalize the G. You have to make a big G.
That's a different word. Small G God is a noun. Big G God is a proper noun representing Yahweh.
Now, what happens if you're going to start the sentence with the word God? You have to make a big G anyway, don't you? So you wouldn't know if it was God, big God, or God, a little God, just any old God. You wouldn't know.
I'm sorry, I thought this video was made for English-speaking people, and by a native English speaker, no less. Are you seriously telling me that you can't tell what's being referred to when I say, God said, let there be light, or a God said, let there be light, or God's said, let there be light? Really? I've heard some horror stories about education in Texas, but I refuse to believe it was ever that bad.
Also, whenever you're speaking to someone, they can't see the letters, so when you say God, which God? What God are you talking about?
Again, are you saying you wouldn't have any clue what was meant if I said, while I was asleep, God sent me a vision? Or, while I was asleep, a God sent me a vision? Or, while I was asleep, their God sent me a vision? Or, while I was asleep, the gods sent me a vision? You've got to be having me on, Joe.
In Arabic, though, it's clear when you say ilah, okay, he's talking about a God. And Allah is an ilah. But he's also al-ilah, the only ilah. And when you say Allah, this firms it up. And there's no doubt in anybody's mind that you're talking about the one and only God.
Yeah, seriously, that was supposed to be an explanation for why the name Allah is so much better than the name God. Apparently, the number one reason is that Joe doesn't know English. You know, it's not like I care what you call the concept. You can call it fahugwagats for all that matters to me. But I just couldn't bring myself to leave this out. It was just too dumb. I'll stop here, though. It just gets more pointless from here on. I mean, apparently it's really impressive that the word Allah can't be made plural and isn't gendered, and Allah uses the royal we to refer to himself. Whatever. You know, for all the talk of proof in this video, it was suspiciously absent. Even simple things like Quranic verses to bolster the claims of the Quran's magnificent supernatural knowledge about the universe were missing. At least when a Christian's on TV, they'll usually cite some lame verse when they want you to believe the Bible is true because so many of its amazing predictions have been fulfilled. Maybe it's a selection issue. Maybe there aren't enough people calling Muslims on their shit to force the quality of Islamic apologetics to improve to compensate. I'm sure there are plenty of atheists who'd be happy to help with that. Come on guys, we need tons more videos debunking Islamic apologetics. If you like to debunk, I will definitely watch your video if you do that.